I'm settled at last in Inishman, in a small cottage with a continual drone of Gaelic coming from the kitchen that opens into my room. Early this morning, the owner of the cottage came over for me in a 4-hour curragh, and we set off a little before noon. It gave me a moment of exquisite satisfaction to find myself moving away from civilization in this crude canvas canoe of a type that has served primitive races since man first went on the sea. During the thunderstorm we arrived in, I saw several girls with men's waistcoats buttoned around their bodies. Their skirts do not come much below their knee and show off their powerful legs in the heavy indigo stockings with which they are all provided. My room is at one end of the cottage, with the boarded floor and ceiling and 2 windows opposite each other. Then there is the kitchen with an earth floor and open rafters, and 2 doors opposite each other opening into the open air, but no windows. Beyond it are 2 smaller rooms, half of the width of the kitchen, with 1 window apiece.
The kitchen itself, where I will spend most of my time, is full of beauty and distinction. The red dresses of the women who cluster around the fire on their stools give a glow of almost Eastern richness, and the walls are toned by the turf smoke to a soft brown that blends with the grey earth colour of the floor. Many sorts of fishing tackle and the nets and oilskins of the men are hung upon the walls or in the open rafters, and right overhead under the thatch there is a whole cowskin from which they make pampooties. Every article on this island has an almost personal character, which gives this simple life where all art is unknown something of the artistic beauty of medieval life. The currachs and spinning wheels, the tiny wooden barrels that are still much used in place of earthenware, the homemade cradles, churns and baskets are all full of individuality, and being made from materials that are common here, yet to some extent peculiar to the island, they seem to exist as a natural link between the people and the world that is about.
The general knowledge of time on the island depends, curiously enough, on the direction of the wind. Nearly all the cottages are built, like this one, with 2 doors opposite each other, the more sheltered of which lies open all day to allow light to the interior. If the wind is northerly, the south door is open, and the shadow of the doorpost moving across the kitchen floor indicates the hour. As soon, however, as the wind changes to the south, the other door is opened, and the people, who never think of putting up a primitive dial, are at a loss.
This system of doorways has another curious result. It usually happens that all the doors on one side of the village pathway are lying open, with the women sitting about on the threshold, while on the other side the doors are shut, and there is no sign of life. The moment the wind changes, everything is reversed. And sometimes when I come back to the cottage after an hour's walk about the island, there seems to have been a general flight from one side of the way to the other. In my own cottage here, the change of doorways alters the whole tone of the kitchen, turning it from a brilliant lighted room looking out on a yard and a laneway to a sombre cell with a superb view of the sea.
Nearly all the families who live here have relations who have had to cross the Atlantic, and all eat of the flour and bacon that is brought from the United States. So they have a vague fear that if anything were to happen to America, their own island would cease to be habitable.
Most of the strangers they see on the island are philological students, which has led the people to conclude that linguistic studies, particularly Gaelic studies, are the chief occupation of the outside world. One old man said to me,
I've seen Germans and Danes and Frenchmen, and there'd be a power of Irish books along with them, and they're reading them better than ourselves. Believe me, there are few rich men in the world now that are not studying the Gaelic.
creeping fogs has passed over and given me a strange sense of exile and desolation. I walk around the island nearly every day, but I can see nothing anywhere except a mass of wet rock, a strip of surf, and then a tumult of waves. Now the rain continues. But this evening, a number of young men were in the kitchen mending nets, and a bottle of poitín was drawn from its hiding place. One cannot think of these men drinking wine on the summit of this crumbling precipice, but their grey poitín, which brings a shock of joy to the blood, seems predestined to keep sanity in men who live forgotten in these worlds of mist.
I sat in the kitchen part of the evening to feel the gaiety that was rising. And when I went to my own room after dark, one of the sons came in every time the bottle made its round to pour me out my share.
Today it has cleared at last, and the sun is shining with a luminous warmth that makes the whole island glisten with the splendor of a gem, and fills the sea and sky with a radiance of blue light. I come out to lie on the rock, where I have the black edge of the North Island in front of me. Galway Bay, too blue almost to look at on my right. The Atlantic on my left, a perpendicular cliff under my ankles, and over me innumerable gulls that chase each other in a white cirrus of wings. As I lie here hour after hour, I seem to enter into the wild pastimes of the cliff and become a companion of the cormorants and crows. The old man, Aran, has been telling me a story.
One day, I was travelling on foot from Galway to Dublin, and the darkness came on me, and 10 miles from the town I was wanting to pass the night in. Then a hard rain began to fall, and when I saw a sort of a house up against the side of the road with no roof on it, I went in the way of the walls to give me shelter. I was looking round, and I saw a light in some trees 2 perches off, and thinking any sort of a place would be better than where I was, I got over the wall and I went up to the house to be looking in at the window. I saw a dead man laid out on a table, and candles lighted, and a woman watching him. I was frightened when I saw him, but 'twas raining hard, and I said to myself, sure if he's dead, he couldn't hurt me. Then I knocked on the door, and the woman came and opened it. Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening, kindly stranger. Come in out of the rain.
Then she took me in, and she told me that her husband was after dying on her, and that she was watching him that night.
But as thirsty you'll be, stranger. Come into the parlour.
She took me into the parlour, and 'twas a fine, clean house, and she put a cup with a saucer under it on the table before me, with fine sugar and bread. Well, when I'd had my cup of tea, I went back up to the kitchen where the dead man was lying, and she gave me a fine new pipe at the table with a drop of spirits.
Stranger, would you be afeard to be alone with his dead?
He will a bit in the world, man. Sure, he that's dead can do no hurt. Then she said she was going over to tell her neighbours the way her husband was after dying on her. And she went out, and she locked the door behind her. Well, I smoked one pipe, and I leaned over, and I took another one off the table, and I was smoking it with one hand at the back of my chair, like I am myself this minute, God bless me. When the dead man opened his eyes as wide as myself and looked at me. Don't be afeard, stranger, said the dead man. Sure, I'm not dead at all in the world. Come here and help me up and I'll tell you all about it. Well, I went up and I took the sheet off, and I saw that he had a fine, clean shirt on his body and fine flannel drawers. Well, he sat up then and says he, I've got a bad wife, stranger, and I let on to be dead the way I'd catch her goings on. Then he took 2 fine sticks that he had to keep his wife down, and he put one each side of his body, and he
laid himself out again as if he were dead. In half an hour his wife came back, and a young man with her. Well, she gave him his tea, and then she told him he was tired and he could do well to lie down in the bedroom. Well, the young man went in, and the woman sat down to watch by the dead man. A while after, she got up.
Stranger, I'm going in to get the candle out of the room. I'm thinking the young man will be asleep by this time.
She went into the bedroom. Devil a bit to her came back. Well, the dead man got up, and he took one stick, and he gave the other one to myself. And we went in, and we saw them lying together with her head on his arm. Ah, well, the dead man gave him one bent to the stick, and the blood out of it leapt up, and it hit the gallery. That's my story.
It is a holy day, and I have come up to sit on the dune while the people are at Mass. A strange tranquility has come over the island this morning, as happens sometimes on a Sunday, filling the two circles of sea and sky with the quiet of the church. No one who has not lived for weeks among these grey clouds and seas can imagine the joy with which the eye rests on the red dresses of the women, especially when a number of them are to be found together, as happened early this morning.
But the women and girls, when they have no men with them, usually try to make fun with me.
Is it tight, yeah, stranger?
Aran ye Colleen, how eating is Aran. Be daddy, 'tis not, little girl, 'tis lonely I am.
Here is my little sister, stranger, will give you her Aran.
And so it went on. Quite as these women are on ordinary occasions, when 2 or 3 of them get together in their petticoats and shawls, they are as wild and capricious as the women who live in towns. On this occasion they were overexcited, and when I tried to talk to them, they began jeering and screeching at me because I am not married. A dozen or so screamed at a time, and so rapidly that I could not make out what they were saying. But I was able to understand that they were taking advantage of the absence of their husbands to give me the full volume of their contempt. Some little boys that were listening threw themselves down, writhing with laughter among the seaweed, and the young girls grew red with embarrassment and stared down into the surf. For a moment I was in confusion. I tried to talk to them, but I could not make myself heard. So I sat down on the slip and drew out my wallet of photographs, and in an instant the entire band were clamouring around me in their ordinary mood. Yesterday, a letter came from the son who was in America to say that he had a slight accident to one of his arms, but was well again, and was leaving New York to go a few hundred miles up the country.
All that evening, the old woman sat in her stool in the corner of the fire, her shawl thrown over her head, keening piteously to herself. America appeared far away, yet she seems to have felt that after all it was only the other edge of the Atlantic. But now when she hears them talking of railroads and inland cities, where there is no sea, things she cannot understand, it comes home to her that her son is gone forever. She often tells me how she used to sit on the wall behind the house last year and watch the hooker he was working on coming out of Kilronan and beating up the sound, and what company it used to be to her, the time they'd all be up.
The maternal instincts are so powerful on these islands that it gives a life of torment to the women. Their sons grow up to be banished as soon as they are of age, or live in continual danger on the sea. Their daughters go away also, or are worn out in their youth with bearing children who grow up to harass them in their own turn a little later. The other day, taken out in a curragh, I felt the full might of the sea. It was a 4-oar curragh, and I was given the last seat to allow the stern for the man that was steering with an oar, worked at right angles to the others by an extra toll pin in the stern gunwale. When we'd gone about 100 yards, they ran up a bit of a sail in the bow, and our pace became extraordinarily rapid. The shower had passed over. The wind had fallen, but large, magnificently brilliant waves were rolling down on us at right angles to our course.
Every instant the steersman whirled us round with a sudden stroke of his oar. The prow reared up, and then fell into the next furrow with a crash, throwing masses of spray. As it did so, the stern was thrown up, and both the steersman, who let go his oar and clung with both hands to the gunwale, and myself were lifted high up above the sea.
The wave passed over. We regained our course and rowed violently for a few yards. Then the same manoeuvre had to be repeated. As we worked our way out into the Sound, we began to meet another class of wave, which could be seen for some distance, towering above the rest.
When one of these came in sight, our first effort was to get beyond the Synge, and the steersman began crying out in Gaelic,
"Shoo! Shoo!"
"Run, run!" And sometimes when the wave was moving towards us with horrible speed, his voice rose to a shriek. Then the rowers themselves took up the cry, and the currach seemed to lap and quiver with the frantic terror of a beast, till the wave passed behind it and fell with a crash beside the stern.
It was in this racing with the waves that our chief danger lay. If the wave could be avoided, it was better to do so. But if it overtook us while we were trying to escape and caught us on our broadside, our destruction was certain. I could see the steersman quivering with the excitement of his task, for any error in his judgment would have swamped us. We had one narrow escape.
A wave appeared high up above the rest. There was the unusual moment of intense exertion, but it was of no use, and in an instant the wave seemed to be hurling itself upon us. With a yell of rage, the steersman struggled with his oar to bring our prow to meet it. He had almost succeeded, when there was a rush and crash of water round us. It felt as if I had been struck on the back with knotted ropes. White foam gurgled round my knees and eyes. The currach reared up, swaying and trembling for a moment, then fell safely into the foam.
This was our worst moment. For more than once, when several waves came so closely together, we had no time to regain control of the current between them. We had some dangerous work. Our lives depended upon the courage and skill of the men, just as the life of a rider or swimmer is often in his own hands. And the excitement of the struggle was too great to allow time to fear.
But I enjoyed the passage, down in this shallow trough of canvas that bent and trembled with the motion of the men.
I had a far more intimate feeling of the power and glory of the waves than I have ever known in a steamer.
Today I walked out with a blind man, old Morchi. As I led him home through the paths he knew, lifting him at times over the low walls, he brought the conversation round to the topic they're never weary of, my views on marriage.
Mr. Noble person, do you never be thinking of the young girls? The time I was a young man, but the devil of one I could look on without wanting to marry.
Yeah, Morchi, it's a great wonder you'd be asking me. What at all do you think of me yourself?
Be that noble person, 'tis thinking I'm soon you'll be getting married. Listen to what I'm telling you. A man that's not married is no better than an old jackass. He goes into his brother's house, and he goes into his sister's house. He eats a bit in this place, and he eats a bit in that place. Sure, he have no home of his own. He's like an old jackass, straight on the rock.
Lingering late by the sea this evening, I could hear nothing but a few curlews and other wildfowl crying and shrieking in the seaweed, the low rustling of the waves. It was one of those dark, sultry nights peculiar to September, with no light anywhere, except the phosphorescence of the sea and an occasional rift in the cloud that shows the stars behind me. The sense of solitude was immense. I could not see or realize my own body, and seemed to exist merely in my perception of the waves, and of the crying birds, and the smell of the seaweed. When I tried to come home, I lost myself among the sand dunes, and the night seemed to grow unutterably cold and dejected as I groped among masses of slimy seaweed and wet, crumbling walls. After a while, I heard a movement in the sand, and two grey shadows appeared beside me. The two men who were going home from fishing. I spoke to them, I knew their voices, and we went home together. Now the wind outside is terrific. If anything serious should happen to me, I might die here, and be nailed in my box, and shoved down into a wet crevice in the graveyard, before anyone could know it on the mainland.
After Mass this morning, an old woman was buried. She lived in the cottage next to mine, and more than once before noon, I could hear the faint echo of the keen. I did not go to the funeral, for fear my presence might jar upon the mourners. But all last evening, I could hear the strokes of a hammer in the yard, where in the middle of a little crowd of idlers, the next of kin laboured slowly at the coffin. Today, before the hour of the funeral, poteen was served to a number of men who stood about on the road, and a portion was brought to me in my room. Then, the coffin was carried out, sewn loosely in sailcloth, and held close to the ground by 3 cross poles lashed across the top. As we moved down to the low eastern portion of the island, nearly all the men and all the oldest women with petticoats over their heads came out and joined in the procession.
While the grave was being opened, women sat down among the flat tombstones, bordered with pale fringe of early bracken, and began the wild keen, or crying for the dead. Each old woman, as she took her turn in leading the recitative, seemed possessed for a moment in a profound ecstasy of grief, swaying to and fro, and bending her forehead to the stone before her, while she called out to the dead with a perpetually recurring chant of sobs. All round the graveyard were other wrinkled women, looking out from under the deep red petticoats that cloaked them, rocked with the same rhythm, and intoned the inarticulate chant that is sustained by all as an accompaniment. Morning had been beautifully fine, but now as they lowered the coffin into the grave, thunder rumbled overhead, and hailstones hissed among the bracken.
In Inishmian, one is forced to believe in the sympathy between man and nature, and at this moment, when the thunder sounded a death peal of extraordinary grandeur above the voices of the women, I could see the faces near me stiff and drawn with emotion.
This grief of the keen is no personal complaint for the death of one woman of 80 years, but seems to contain the whole passionate rage that lurks in every native on this island. In this cry of pain, their inner consciousness seems to be released and to lay itself bare for a moment, to reveal the mood of people who feel their isolation in the face of a universe that wars on them with winds and seas.
They are usually silent, but in the presence of death, all outward show of patience or indifference is forgotten, and they shriek with pitiable despair before the horror of the fate to which they are all doomed.
Old Pact Aran continues to come up every day to talk to me, and at times I turn the conversation to his experiences of the fairies.
I've seen a good many of them in different parts of the island, especially in the sandy districts north of the Schlip. They're about a yard high, with caps like the peelers pulled down over the faces. On one occasion, I saw them playing ball in the evening just above the Schlip. And I said to myself, I best avoid that place in the morning or after dark, for fear they might do me mischief. And another night I heard them crying out, What upon me mother, one mother I'm dead. In the morning, there was blood on the wall in me house, and a child in a house not far off was dead.
Yesterday, Pat took me aside and said he would tell me a secret he had never yet told to any person in the world.
Take a sharp needle and stick it in under the collar of your coat, and not one of them will be able to have the power over you.
Some dreams I have had in this cottage seem to give strength to the belief that there is a psychic memory attached to certain neighborhoods.
Last night, in a dream after walking among buildings with a strangely intense light on them, I heard a faint rhythm of music beginning far away on some stringed instrument. It came closer to me, gradually increasing in quickness and volume, with an irresistibly definite progression. When it was quite near, the sound began to move in my nerves and blood and urged me to dance with them. I knew that if I yielded, I would be carried away to some moment of intense agony, so I struggled to remain quiet, holding my knees together with my hands. The music increased continually, sounding like the strings of a harp tuned to a forgotten scale, and having a resonance as searching as the strings of the cello. Then the luring excitement became more powerful than my will, and my limbs moved in spite of me.
In a moment, I was swept away in a whirlwind of notes. My breath and my thoughts and every impulse of my body became a form of the dance, till I could not distinguish between the instruments, the rhythm, and my own being or consciousness. For a while, it was an excitement that was filled with joy. Then it grew into an ecstasy, where all existence was lost in a vortex of movement. I could not think there had been any life beyond the whirling of the dance. Then with a shock, the ecstasy turned into an agony and rage. I struggled to free myself, but seemed only to increase the passion of the steps I moved to. When I shrieked, I could only echo the notes of the rhythm. At last, in a moment of uncontrollable frenzy, I broke back to consciousness and awoke.
I dragged myself slowly to the window of the cottage and gazed out. The moon was glittering across the bay. There was no sound anywhere on the island. One old woman, the oldest on the island, is fond of telling me anecdotes, not folk tales, of things that happened here in her lifetime.
There was once a Connacht man who killed his father with a blow of a spade when he was in passion. Then he fled to this island and threw himself on the mercy of some of the people here. They threw him in a hole then and kept him safe for weeks, though the police came and searched for him. And couldn't he hear their boots grinding on the stones over his head?
In spite of a reward that was offered, the island was incorruptible, and after much trouble, a man was safely shipped to America. This impulse to protect the criminal is universal in the West. It seems partially due to the association between justice and the hated English jurisdiction, but more directly to the primitive feelings of these people, who were never criminals, yet always capable of crime. So, that a man cannot do wrong if he is under the passion of an influence as irresponsible as a storm on the sea. If a man has killed his father and is sick and broken with remorse, they see no reason why he should be dragged away and killed by the law. Such a man, they say, will be quiet all the rest of his life. And if you suggest that punishment is needed as an example, they ask,
Sure, would anyone kill his father if he was able to help it?
the same old woman once gave me her view on the use of fear.
A man who is not afraid of the sea will soon be drowned, for he will be going out a day he shouldn't. But we do be afraid of the sea, and we do only be drowned now and again.
2 recent attempts to carry out evictions on the island came to nothing.
for each time a sudden storm made it impossible for the steamer to land. They say the storm was stirred up by a local witch.
This morning, however, broke beneath a clear sky of June. When I came out into the open air, the sea and rocks were shining with wonderful brilliancy. Groups of men dressed in their holiday clothes were standing about, talking with anger and fear, yet showing a lurking satisfaction at the thought of the dramatic pageant that was to break the silence of the seas.
At 9:30 the steamer came in sight, and immediately a last effort was made to hide the cows and sheep of the families most in debt. Till this year, no one on the island would consent to act as bailiff, so it was impossible to identify the cattle of the defaulters. Now, however, a man by the name of Patrick has sold his honour, and the effort of concealment is practically futile. This falling away from the ancient loyalty to the island has caused intense indignation, and early yesterday morning, while I was dreaming on the dune, this letter was nailed to the doorpost of the chapel.
Patrick the Devil, a revolver is waiting for you. If you are missed with the first shot, there'll be 5 more that'll hit you. Any man who'll talk with you, or work with you, or drink a pint of porter in your shop will be done with the same way as yourself.
About midday, however, a house was reached where there was no pretext for mercy and no money could be procured. And a sign from the sheriff, the work of carrying out the beds and utensils was begun in absolute silence, broken only by the wild imprecations of the woman of the house, who shook with uncontrollable fury as she saw these strange armed men who spoke a language she did not understand, driving her from the heart she had brooded on for 30 years. For these people, the outrage to the heart is a supreme catastrophe. They live here in a world of grey, where there are wild mists and rains every week of the year, and the warm chimney corners, filled with children and young girls, grow into the consciousness of each family in a way that is not easy to understand in more civilized places. Indeed, the outrage to a tomb in China probably gives no greater shock to the Chinese than the outrage to a heart in Inishmian gives to these people.
And the few trifles had been carried out and the door blocked with stone. The old woman sat down by the threshold and covered her head with her shawl. 5 or 6 other women who lived close by sat down in a circle round her in mute sympathy. And the crowd moved on with the police to another cottage, where the same scene was to take place, and left the group of desolate women sitting by the hole.
One evening, at a gathering in the cottage, a young man came up to give me a copy of the Love Songs of Connaught. I persuaded him to read, or rather chant me some of them. And when he had read a few, I found that the old woman knew most of them from her childhood, though her version was often not the same as what was in the book.
She was rocking herself on a stool in the chimney corner beside a pot of indigo in which she was dyeing wool. Several times when the young man finished a poem, she took it up again and recited the verses with exquisite musical intonation, putting a wistfulness and passion into her voice that seemed to give it all the cadences that are sought in the profoundest poetry. The lamp had burned low, and another terrible gale was howling and shrieking over the island. It seemed like a dream that I should be sitting here among these men and women, listening to this rude and beautiful poetry that is filled with the oldest passions of the world.
Then I played on my fiddle a French melody to get used to the people and the qualities of the room, which has little resonance between the earth floor and the thatch overhead. Then I struck up the black robe, and in a moment a tall man bounded from his chair behind the chimney and began flying around the kitchen with sure and graceful bravado.
The lightness of the Pamputi seems to make the dancing on this island lighter and swifter than anything I have seen on the mainland. And the simplicity of the men enables them to throw a naive extravagance into their steps that is impossible in places where people are self-conscious. little while after that, the old men went away, and I was left with some young men between 20 or 30 who talked to me of different things. One of them asked me if ever I was drunk. Another said to me,
"Wouldn't you do well now to marry a nice woman from this island? For there are nice women, fine fat girls who have plenty of money and strong and will make plenty of children for you and not be wasting your money on you."
a young married woman I used often to talk with is dying of the fever, typhus I am told, and her husband and brothers have gone off in a curragh to get the doctor and priest from the North Island, though the sea is rough.
I watched them for a long time after they had started. Wind and rain was driving through the sound, and I could hear no boats or people anywhere, except for this one black curragh struggling and splashing through the waves. Then, when the wind fell a little, I could hear people hammering below me to the east. The body of the young man that was drowned a few weeks ago came ashore this morning, and his friends have been busy all day making a coffin in the yard of the house where he lived. After a while, the curragh went out of sight into the mist, and I came back down to the house, struggling with the cold and the misery. And the old woman was keening by the fire.
I've been to the house where the young man is, but I couldn't go to the door where the air was coming out of it. They say his head isn't on him at all, and it isn't any wonder in he 3 weeks in the sea. Isn't it terrible danger and sorrow is over everyone on this island?
Do you know if the curragh will soon be coming back with the priest?
It will not be coming soon or indeed at all tonight. The wind has gone up now, and there'll come no curragh to this island for maybe 2 days or 3. And isn't it a cruel thing to see the haste that is on them, and they in danger all the time to be drowned themselves?
How is the woman doing?
She's nearly lost. She won't be alive at all tomorrow morning. They've no boards to make her a coffin, and they'll want to borrow the boards a man below has had this 2 years to bury his mother. Is she alive still? And I heard them saying that there are 2 more women with the fever, and a child that's not 3. The Lord have mercy on us all.
I went out again to look out over the sea. Night had fallen, and the hurricane was howling over the dome. I walked down the lane, and I could hear the keening from the house where the young man was. Further on, I could see a story about the cottage that was last struck by typhus. Then I turned back again in the teeth of the rain, and I sat by the fire with the old man and woman, talking about the sorrows of those people, till it was late in the night.
A few days I had some photographs to show them that I took.
While I was sitting on a little stool near the door of the kitchen, showing them to the family, a beautiful young woman that I had spoken to a few times slipped in, and after a wonderfully simple and cordial speech of welcome, sat down on the floor beside me to look on also. The complete absence of shyness or self-consciousness in most of these people gives them a peculiar charm, and when this young and beautiful woman leaned across my knee to look nearer at some photograph that pleased her, I felt more than ever the strange simplicity of the island life.
In some ways, these men and women seem strangely far away from me. They have the same emotions that I have and the animals have. Yet I cannot talk to them when there is much to say, more than to the dog that whines beside me in a mountain fog.
The body of a man has come ashore in Donegal with one pampooti on him, and a striped shirt, and a purse in one of the pockets, and a box for his tobacco. For 3 days, the people here have been trying to fix his identity. Some think he's the man from this island. Others think that the man from the south answers the description more exactly. Tonight, as we were returning from the slip, we met the mother of the man that was drowned from this island, still weeping, gazing out over the sea. She stopped the people who had come over from the south to ask them with a terrified whisper,
What are they thinking over there?
Later in the evening, while I was sitting in one of the cottages, the sister of the dead man came in through the rain with her infant. There was a long talk about the rumours that had come in, and she pieced together all she could remember about his clothes and about his purse, and where he got it, and what it was like, and the same for his tobacco box and his stockings. In the end, there seemed little doubt that it was her brother.
That's Mike, sure enough. And please God, they'll give him a decent burial.
Then she began to keen slowly to herself. Her loose yellow hair was plastered around her head from the rain, and as she sat by the door, suckling her infant, she seemed like the type of women's life upon these islands.
For a while, the people sat silent, and one could hear nothing but the lips of the infant, the rain hissing in the yard, and the breathing of 4 pigs that lay sleeping around the corner. Then one of the men began to talk about the new boats that had been sent to the South Island, and the conversation went back to its usual round of topics.
I have had another trip in a curragh, this time on a calm sea.
Our progress was so slow that the clouds came up with a rise in the wind before we reached the shore, and rain began to fall in large single drops. The black curragh moving slowly through this world of grey, the soft hissing of the rain, gave me one of the moods in which we realise with immense distress the short moment we have left us to experience all the wonder and beauty of the world.
The young woman with typhus has died and been buried. When the coffin was placed near where the grave was to be opened, 2 long switches were cut from the bramble among the rocks, and the length and breadth of the coffin was marked on them. Then the men began moving away stones and thin layers of earth and breaking up an old coffin that was in the place where the new one was to be buried.
A number of blackened boards and pieces of bone had been thrown up with the clay. A skull was lifted up and placed on a tombstone. Immediately, the old woman, the mother of the dead man, took it up in her hands and carried it away by herself. And she sat down and put it in her lap. It was the skull of her own mother, and began keening and shrieking over it with the wildest lamentation.
As the pile of mouldering clay got higher beside the grave, a heavy smell began to rise from it, and the men hurried with their work, measuring the hole repeatedly with the 2 rods of bramble. Then the old woman came back up to the coffin, and she began to beat on it, holding the skull in her left hand. This last moment of grief was the most terrible of all.
Young women were almost lying down among the tombstones, worn out with their passion of grief, yet raising themselves every few moments to beat with magnificent gestures on the boards of the coffin. The young men were worn out also, and their voices cracked continually in the way of the keel.
When everything was ready, the sheet was unpinned from the coffin, and it was lowered into its place. Then an old man took a wooden vessel with holy water in it and a wisp of bracken, and the people crowded round him as he splashed the water over them. They seemed eager to get as much of it as possible, more than one old woman who cried out with a humorous voice, Martin, Martin, give us another drop.
There is hardly an hour I am with them that I do not feel the shock of some inconceivable idea, and then again the shock of some vague emotion that is familiar to them and to me. On some days I feel this island is a perfect home and resting place. On other days I feel a weight among the people. I can feel more with them than they can feel with me. And while I wander among them, they like me sometimes and laugh at me sometimes, yet never know what I am doing.
In the evenings, I sometimes meet with a young girl who is not yet half through her teens, yet seems more consciously developed than anyone else I have met here. She has spent part of her life on the mainland, and the disillusion she found in Galway has coloured her imagination. As we sit on two stools in the evening, I can hear her voice going backwards and forwards in the same sentence, from the gaiety of a child to the plaintive intonation of an old race worn with sorrow. At one moment she's a simple peasant, and at another she seems to be gazing out on the world with a sense of prehistoric disillusion. And to sum up in the expression of her grey blue eyes, the whole external dependency on the clouds and sea. Our conversation is often disjointed, and one evening we talked about a town on the mainland.
It's a queer place. I wouldn't choose to live in it. It's a queer place. And indeed, I don't know the place that isn't.
Another evening, we talked of the people that live on the island or come to visit it.
Father is gone. He was a kind man, but a queer man. Priests is queer people. And indeed, I don't know who isn't. You know, I'm very fond of the boys.
Another evening, I found her trying to make a fire in the little room of her cottage where there's an ordinary fireplace. I went in to help her, and I showed her how to hold up a piece of paper before the mouth of the chimney to make a draft, a method she had never seen. Then I told her of men that live alone in Paris and make their own fires, so that they may have no one to bother them. She was sitting on a heap on the floor, gazing into the turf. And as I finished, she looked up at me in surprise.
They're like me, so. Sure, would anyone have thought that?
I've never heard talk so simple or so attractive as the talk of these people. This evening they began disputing about their wives, and it appears they see no greater merit in a woman than she should be fruitful and bring them many children. As no money can be earned by children on the island, this one attitude shows the immense difference between these people and the people of Paris. The direct sexual instincts are not weak on the island, but they are so subordinated to the instincts of the family that they rarely lead to irregularity. Life here is almost at a patriarchal stage, and the people are as far from the romantic mood of love as they are from the impulsive life of the savage. But below all that sympathy, there is still a chasm between us. And now, sadly, I've had my last evening on my stool in the chimney corner. I had a long talk with some neighbours who came in to bid me prosperity. They sat about on the floor with their heads on low stools and their feet stretched into the embers of the turf. The old woman was sitting by the other side of the fire, and the girl that I had spoken about was standing by her spinning wheel, talking, joking with everyone.
When you go away now, you're to marry a rich wife with plenty of money. And if she dies on you, you're to come back here and marry myself for your second wife.
The next day,